On Colombia's efforts to negotiate with the ELN. I'm joined by Peter Vincent. He served with the U.S. Justice Department as a judicial attaché at the U.S. Embassy in Colombia. He's now an Assistant Director General with Borderpol, an international security organization. Let's start there. It's interesting. A spokesman for the ELN said earlier, I was reading this, that Sanchez should not be turned into noise that affects the beginning of negotiations. I guess it's how you view it, either side. Is it going to be a major sticking point, or do you think that they can get this thing resolved rather quickly?
I think they will get it resolved relatively quickly, by quickly within the next couple of days. But it's not noise for the Colombian people, and certainly for Colombian President Juan Manuel Santos, who over the past 2 years, during informal preliminary discussions, has made it very clear that the release of all hostages, including Mr. Sanchez, was a condition precedent to actually continuing on and formally starting the talks in Quito, Ecuador.
And Peter, we want to use your history with Colombia because you do know a little bit about it. I was reading, this is not something new. The governments there have been trying to negotiate with the ELN about 7 times now. What's been the sticking point that have prevented them from putting down the weapons and signing a deal?
The ELN and the FARC are different in many ways. They both, however, started off in 1964 as Marxist-Leninist organizations fighting a democratically elected government in Colombia. The difference is that the ELN was not only a Marxist-Leninist organization, but it was started by radical priests, liberation theologists. And so the ELN, although its numbers are much smaller than that of the FARC, only about 2,000 armed combatants, is much more ideologically committed to Marxist-Leninism as well as to the theory of liberation theology.
So talk to me about this dual track. Santos obviously wants this legacy as the man who brings peace to Colombia. The FARC deal, as we know, went down in flames at the ballot box. They're still trying to salvage that. They're trying to do this. Is he biting off more than he can handle, or is this a smart strategy to go in both directions?
Mike, I actually think it's a smart strategy. It's a long-term strategy. He understands that getting a deal with the ELN will actually be much more difficult, even though the numbers are smaller, than getting a deal with the FARC. Of course, he has been through an emotional ringer, as has the entire population of Colombia, with the ceasefire with the FARC, with the signing of the accords, with the Constitutional Court decision, and then, of course, with the plebiscite fail, essentially on October 2nd. He thinks that if he can get this smaller group, the ELN, to the negotiating table the next few days and then engage in this 22 rounds of negotiations, the first one lasting about 45 days, that will put additional pressure on the FARC to come back to the negotiating table in Havana. The real challenge with the ELN is not only are the ELN commanders much more ideologically committed than the FARC commanders are, they are also much more decentralized. The ELN fronts or platoons are actually much more autonomous and decentralized than the FARC platoons. And so that makes it more difficult for the rank and file to step in line at the direction of the ELN leaders.
You and I have watched all of this. I mean, the Havana, it was years, and I mean, they got into the weeds, agrarian reform and everything. I mean, is it going to be similar with the ELN? I mean, is it going to be a painstaking process?
Mike, it will be a painstaking process. However, President Santos is looking at, as you pointed out, burnishing his legacy. He is a Nobel Prize winner now, and he is richly deserving of that particular award. By the way, he has donated the entire, just short of $1 million to the victims of the war in Colombia. What he has is about 2 years left to build his legacy before he is out of office. So it will be a painstaking process, but by definition, in order to help President Santos burnish his legacy, it cannot last longer than 2 years. And that will put additional pressure on the ELN leadership as well.
So which one do you see basically coming to a conclusion sooner? The FARC, I mean, they're so close already, but I imagine there's still got to be some contours worked out. As you look at both of the negotiations, where do you see them?
Mike, it's an excellent question. I actually see all that will be more complicated, the ELN matter resolving quicker. The main reason for that is that the FARC leadership has agreed to extend the bilateral ceasefire through the end of 2016 to the end of this year. There is no ceasefire of any sort right now between the government of Colombia and the ELN. Therefore, there is great pressure to resolve the matter as quickly as possible. The FARC leadership will stand by, they will watch what happens, and then they will follow the lead, essentially a model where hopefully there is a successful negotiation between the ELN and the government of Colombia.
One final question before I let you go. As a man who has lived in Colombia, has seen it go through so much pain and agony over the years, What's your feeling as you watch things kind of starting to fall into place? I mean, we can be perhaps a little too optimistic, but one has to think this is kind of turning a new page in the country.
I am still hopeful and optimistic. This has been an emotional roller coaster for the Colombian people. I do believe, though, because there is continuing good faith efforts on both sides, with both the ELN and the FARC, that they'll ultimately achieve the success and they'll have peace. But it's going to be at least a year and a half or 2 years before they achieve that particular very, very valid goal.
All right, Peter, thanks so much for coming in.
Thank you, Mike.